Hey friends, thanks so much for tuning in. You know, this is a real thrill for me to be able to just take a step back from all that's going on in Las Vegas right now to return to the world of economics and precious metals and cryptocurrencies and take a deep breath here to talk about all of that stuff with our good friend J.S. Kim. He is the founder of Smart Knowledge Wealth Academy, and I'm thrilled to have him back on the line live from Bangkok, Thailand. J.S. Kim, how are you?
I'm fine. How you doing, Sean?
I'm good. Thanks for coming back on, man. How's the weather there in Bangkok?
It's doing okay. It's been a little bit rainy, but surviving.
Surviving? Yeah, well, we're moving towards the fall here in the Midwest where I am. Terrible, terrible fires out west, unimaginably Armageddon-like fires in the Northern California area, some of which are being written about, and people are doing videos about the nature of these fires being so unexplained, structures being burned to the ground, entire neighborhoods literally disappearing.
But the vegetation around is still intact. This did not come in from a forest fire. These homes burned from the inside out.
I don't know what is responsible for it, but man, we're going through a lot of changes. And I want to mention this as it relates to economics, as the Dow just passed 23,000 today as we're having this conversation. A, can you even believe that? And B, do you remember a guy by the name of Pastor Lindsey Williams? Do you know who that is?
Vaguely remember.
Yeah, Dow 23,000. I'll just remind folks here real briefly. He's taken a lot of heat for getting some things wrong, but he's a guy who claimed to have sort of a high-level elite insider friend of his, and he used to work in the oil patches up there in Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, and he was a pastor there to a lot of the oil men. And he always used to do these videos saying that his high-level insider friends told him, here's just one example of his predictions, how you could have made a lot of money. Do you remember when oil was up around, well north of $100 a barrel, and it retraced to 23 or below 30? Do you remember that, JS?
Yeah, I do.
He predicted before that happened that it was going to happen, and then oil was going to rebound to like $150 a barrel. He got that prediction right. Had you bet on Lindsey Williams' predictions there, you'd have made more money than you could have imagined, especially if you'd used options. And then he also predicted that when the Dow was below 10,000, he predicted that the Dow would go to unimaginable heights. The elite were going to take it much higher than anybody thought was possible. And here we sit today at Dow 23,000. Can you even believe it? I mean, what's it going to? 30,000? It seems like they could take it to 50 and nothing's going to stop it because they're in control.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing that the Dow is still climbing, the S&P 500 is still climbing for the majority of this year because it's been a massive bubble in my mind for a long time now. So the way I see it is that I think that at least it'll probably keep going until January of next year, and that's because that's when Janet Yellen is set to resign. So, definitely she does not want this bubble to burst under her reign, because then historically she's going to be blamed for it, right? So I think she is certainly doing her darndest to just keep it going at least until she resigns so she can escape and then let her successor take the fall.
Yeah, you know what's funny about that, though? I mean, of course, you remember when Ron Paul grilled Ben Bernanke about what is gold, and the response was, it's a tradition. The same argument was made with Bernanke. All will be well till he leaves, then they'll blame it on Yellen. Here we are sitting with Yellen, and I didn't actually know she was going to resign there next January. But then they're going to hand the baton to somebody else. Meanwhile, we have people saying this whole thing was going to be blamed on Trump. It'll collapse as soon as Trump comes into office. It's just defying gravity. And you know how many hedge funds have closed? Because even these smartest people in the room can't figure out why the market is behaving this way. It only goes up until those elite decide it's ready to drop. And when they're ready to drop it, it's going to drop like a stone.
Sure, but I still don't think they have absolute control over it because, like you said, it could only defy reality for so long. So there is going to come a point in time. And so, you are right, because I do remember people saying it was going to fall apart after Bernanke left for the same reasons, that he didn't want it to fall under his tenure and that Janet Yellen could be blamed. So, perhaps that's the refutation, that it's going to fall apart when Yellen leaves. But it also, we'll have to see who Trump appoints to be the next chair of the U.S. Federal Reserve. And I think we'll get a better idea then when we see who his new appointee is.
Yeah. All of us in the truth space, though, would so much more prefer to see the Rothschild Federal Reserve being abolished. I mean, wouldn't that be a breath of fresh air? But that's not going to happen. We know it's not going to happen because those central banks around the world are controlled by the elite, and they're not going to relinquish their control. But there's so many people out there around the world now that are embracing cryptocurrencies. And I wanted to get your opinion on Bitcoin because I know you've written a lot about it. What is your take on Bitcoin and the cryptocurrencies in general? Because you and I both know the cryptos have drained a lot of money, mountains of money, north of $175 billion away from precious metals would be one avenue that money could have gone to. All that money that's gone away from other avenues has gone into cryptos as sort of an escape valve, as sort of a last alternative escape from what? The Dow and the NASDAQ, which are both in bonds, which are all in a bubble.
Sure, sure. Well, my take is, Sean, that I look at cryptocurrencies and the 100% digital currency platform as the next stage that central bankers are taking us to. I don't know if Bitcoin is part of that, but I do believe that central bankers, because they understand that their fiat currency system right now is imploding, and we see that with the loss of purchasing power of the U.S. dollar, the euro, the yen, and the British pound, right? The four major global currencies. So I think they understand that their rule in fiat currencies is coming to an end. And fiat currencies, for all intents and purposes, are just digital currencies anyways, right? We have cash and coin, but that only comprises maybe 2% of the fiat currencies in existence. So they're already 98% digital. So their desire, I believe, is just to take it 100% digital. And the big question, the big elephant in the room, I think that a lot of Bitcoin advocates do not want to address is, are central bankers behind Bitcoin? Or at least, I think at a very minimum, they are definitely using the rise in Bitcoin to basically engage the public and gain acceptance of 100% digital currencies, even if they're not behind it. I think they're using the rise of Bitcoin to gain that acceptance of 100% digital currencies.
That's Kranzler's take, and I've made the same argument too. So has Chris Duane. Is it possible that this whole thing was created by the elite to get people to willingly accept digital currency, to take us to a paperless society, which we know they want to do? They've said it. Yeah, and maybe this whole thing has been done by design, but the flip side of that coin is that even if Bitcoin is the creation of the deep state, there are other cryptos that have sprung into existence out of the free market that maybe would be good for humanity. So at the end of the day, there's good and bad to the blockchain.
Yeah, I actually support the blockchain because the blockchain has all these other uses just besides cryptocurrencies. And that's the one thing too, because I've heard a lot of people argue, why Bitcoin is a anti-banking, free humanity type of currency. They'll say it fits the qualities of money, and I've heard Aristotle's four qualities quoted, one of which is that it has inherent value, or has some type of intrinsic value, which I don't believe cryptocurrencies have, because basically, if you say it has intrinsic value, if you look at the definition, that means that the value is the same no matter what its use across the board. And a cryptocurrency, basically, its value is derived from its record on the blockchain. So it depends how that blockchain is used, which means it doesn't fit the intrinsic value characteristic, because one way that the record on the blockchain, the transaction on the blockchain can be used is to protect intellectual property. So say it's recording intellectual property of a photographer, then obviously it's not going to be the close to $6,000 that the record of that transaction is for Bitcoin. So it doesn't even fit those four characteristics. But other than that, I don't even think it fits the characteristics of sound money either, which, basically you want something that has a pretty long record. Now, Bitcoin, when was it invented? I think 2009, right?
Yeah.
So it's been around for about 8 years now. So that's not a long enough time record to really prove up stability and purchasing power. And besides that, we know it's really volatile. Now, granted, it's been volatile on the good end because it's been increasing as far as in dollars. But for anything to fit the definition of sound money, you really want price stability over a long period of time. So you don't even want that volatility because, for sound money, you want to be able to gather it and store it and save it and then know that its purchasing power is going to be there in retirement, which I don't think we can really say with Bitcoin as of today.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, but here's the thing about the brief history of Bitcoin. It cannot be denied that since its invention, any purchase you would have made at any time has made you money. And that cannot be said for virtually, well, maybe for Apple Computer or Amazon and some of these other NASDAQ bubble stocks like Netflix, but virtually any other investment has been far more volatile to the downside. And I want to read this from Julian Assange, and then we're going to bridge into the war against truth by Google and fake news. Julian Assange tweeted this out on October 14th here of this year. My deepest thanks to the U.S. government, Senator McCain and Senator Lieberman, for pushing Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, Amex, money bookers, etc. into erecting an illegal banking blockade against WikiLeaks starting in 2010. It caused us to invest in Bitcoin with a 50,000% return. Boy, that's purchasing power, isn't it, JS?
Yeah, certainly. But there's just a couple other points I want to cover real quickly about the whole Bitcoin debate, whether it's anti-banking or it was invented by central bankers to push their 100% digital currency agenda. And that is that people always say because it's a disruptive, decentralized currency, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, but here's the thing, is that when we look at history, for example, when we look at the Aldrich Plan, right, that gave rise to the Federal Reserve, on the final bill that passed, it actually, they said that when you look at the history, that progressive Democrats demanded a reserve system and currency supply owned and controlled by the government, right, in order to counter the money trust and to destroy the existing existing concentration of credit resources in Wall Street. So they said conservative Democrats back then proposed a decentralized reserve system owned and controlled privately but free of Wall Street domination. Now we know that was just propaganda, right? But we see that same decentralized narrative pushed back then to get the U.S. Federal Reserve approved, that they're pushing, I don't know actually who's pushing this decentralized narrative of Bitcoin, but we know that's not true. And sometimes we have instances in history where those in power, the money trust, have pushed something as anti-banking, which they were behind. So we have historical record of this. And in fact, they also said in the New York Times, they used media to slander the Aldrich Plan as the Oklahoma bill, the Nebraska bill, referring to the home states of the Federal Reserve's biggest opposition leaders. But one of them was Senator Robert Owen, and Owens himself disputed that New York Times claim, saying he supported the new bill because he said it was just the old bill in disguise. So, we have some of the same narratives being pushed in Bitcoin that were pushed to get the U.S. Federal Reserve approved, and that's what makes me really wary. And then on top of that, as far as decentralization, we can even look at gold, because there's no central producer of gold in the entire world, right? The various gold mines are owned by different companies, by different people. It's decentralized production of gold, but yet basically the determination of its price in US dollars has been centralized. So decentralized production does not necessarily even mean decentralized control, because gold is a perfect example where we have decentralized production, but there's centralized control of its price.
That's 100% correct. No, that's a great point. And I was just going to say that about gold and silver and get your thoughts on it. You're in the East, we're in the West. The power is moving from the West to the East, I think, in terms of economics. And, well, I don't know about free markets, but it sure seems like you guys are doing some great things in the East, while the powers that be want to clamp down with, and Trump's trying to correct this by reducing regulations on small businesses, freeing up the free market to actually produce and make money without government intervention. And you're, I think, in the sweet spot in the East. It's exactly why Jim Rogers, he moved his whole family to the East, because he saw what's happening now 10 years ago. He's like, I know everything's moving to the east. I'm going to take my family there and they're going to learn Mandarin. Anyway, the point is, you're there, we're here. People in the United States still don't really think very much about gold and silver. And again, if anything is stolen gold and silver's thunder, it's the cryptos. You live in the East. Are people in the East, do they care more about physical precious metals? Do they see the value of gold and silver in physical form, as far as you can tell, more than Americans do?
Sure, yeah. Actually, there is a definite distinction between East and West as far as attitudes towards gold and silver. And I think, that has to do with the type of narrative that's pushed by the respective governments and also the history, because gold has a long, rich history in Asia of being money. So, as opposed to you saying that you hardly know any Americans that own gold, here, no matter where you go, whether it's Japan, China, Thailand, Singapore, and I've traveled all throughout Asia, you almost can't find someone that doesn't own just at least a little bit of gold or a little bit of silver. So it's the opposite.
I'd heard that, and I believe it to be true, too. I know that's certainly the case in India. People love gold, and what I like about that is they don't see gold as a way of spending fiat and then just buying a luxury item. They see that as a way of preserving their wealth when they trade their fiat for the gold jewelry or whatever. It's a tangible way to store your energy and your labor in really the symbol of your life's work in something that cannot go to zero. And really, if it wasn't manipulated, it would be far, far higher than $17 for silver and $1,200 for gold today, wouldn't it?
Sure would. But here's the thing too, also with cryptocurrencies, which I didn't mention in Asia, they certainly have gained a lot of traction, because it's not like when I speak to people, they don't know what Bitcoin is. I've talked to quite a few Bitcoin investors in Singapore. And the interesting thing about India, because as we all know, the prime minister there, Modi, he banned the 500 and was it 1,000 rupee note? I think those are the rupee notes that basically comprised like 98% of the cash notes in the Indian economy at the time. And I think that was an effort actually to demonetize gold and also to gain acceptance of 100% digital currency there. And I've spoken to Indians about that and said, do you think it's almost wild to me that India could adopt 100% digital currencies, because it's been, for the most part, just a cash economy. And like you said, gold has been a staple of their economy, and even poor people will convert Indian rupees into gold. So it's just not, gold is not just looked as a wealth preservation tactic of the rich. Even those that live in poverty want gold more than rupees. And he told me he thought that India would never go to 100% crypto or digital currency or cryptocurrency economy, just because of the rich history of gold being money in India. He doesn't see people abandoning gold, even if people also own Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies in India.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I was really surprised, and I'm not very familiar with Indian culture. I've never been there, but I was a little surprised. I know, and I hope Indians don't take this the wrong way, I view them as a passive people, a peaceful people, and they were extremely passive when their government tried to take, and did, essentially eliminate 98% or whatever it is of their fiat. They just grinned and bared it, and I don't think they should have. I think it should have caused a revolution. My fear is that that was a litmus test, and the bankers are going to try to do this around the world, and I hope people don't stand for it, because when they take our fiat, they take all of our privacy away, and again, they want to centralize their power. As Aaron Russo told us in that famous documentary by Alex Jones, that's what they want, and if they don't agree with your politics then, they don't like what you're saying on your YouTube channel then, they can just turn off your chip. Good luck taking part in the economy when you have no access to money. That's the problem. And rant over. You can jump in on that if you'd like, but otherwise I wanted to bridge into the fake news thing and the whole Google clampdown on truth.
Sure. Sorry. Okay, I was just saying the one thing I'd like to add to your statement is the fact that, remember when Bitcoin first came out, everyone was saying it was anonymous and that no one knows who owns it. But now,
right,
that's pretty much been disproven, because of course you have a public record of the transaction on the blockchain for every single transaction that's ever been made in Bitcoin. And the fact is that if you don't really understand, if you're not a hacker, you don't really understand these privacy issues, at some point when you convert your Bitcoin back into fiat currency, if you're going to buy gold with it, or you're going to use a banking system in some capacity, they said most people will make some kind of mistake where their identity will be trackable. So even though, you don't have an identity actually attached to the transaction record it's actually much easier, they say, to eventually uncover your identity if they want to know who you are transacting in these cryptocurrencies where the record of the transactions on the blockchain. And in reality, probably cash is more anonymous than any cryptocurrency, since every single transaction in the history of that currency is a public record on the blockchain.
Yeah, you're right. But you know as well as I do that any transactions up to this point in cryptocurrencies, for the majority, I can't speak for everybody, but for the majority of our audience, these are not people doing drug trades or laundering drug money. But as soon as they want to come after you, or as soon as they want to come after the cryptos, and we've seen this in the media, that's what they're going to say the cryptos are for, right? Even when we know it's the big international banks that have been caught laundering drug money and terrorist money, and have paid fines for doing so. HSBC, Deutsche Bank, I think even Wells Fargo has paid some of these fines for doing just that. So when they want to come after the cryptos, they're going to come after the cryptos and say the exact same thing, just like they do with cash, even though we know it always tracks back to the big banks.
Sure. No, I do agree with you there. As far as, I think it's just a lot of people trying to escape the death spiral of the fiat currency system, and more power to them, because they have been able to, basically not only preserve their wealth, but increase it tremendously, against the spiraling downward purchasing power descent of all the fiat currencies, all the major global fiat currencies today.
Right. Well, let me ask you this here before we part ways. I don't want to take too much of your time, but have you been following the Las Vegas shooting, or this Hollywood Harvey Weinstein scandal, or the Assange Hillary Clinton Twitter wars that are going on? Have you been following any of that?
I've been following the Las Vegas a little. I haven't gone into depth. I've listened to, a couple of your podcasts on it to get a lot more information. And, that seems curious how the security guard just disappeared when he was set to go to the press in five different press conferences.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and I lived in LA actually for 8 years. So even though I wasn't an actor, I wasn't in that business at all. I had many friends that were, and those rumors about Weinstein had been going on forever. So I have even heard about them when I was out there. So yeah, I think it's just, again, it's just a matter of those in power, with how corrupt and perverted they are, being able to cover it all up, because they have a lot of power over media that covers them.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to bridge to next, because I know, and this surprised me, but you emailed me when we set up this interview a couple weeks back that you have suffered because of the Google algorithms and the attack really on Truth Media. This is the good news, guys. We're seeing the Hollywood glossy narrative of everything Hollywood has supposedly ever stood for fall apart with these Weinstein accusations, which I think ultimately will lead us down to the rabbit hole of Pedogate and pedophilia, which is the #1 problem in Hollywood, according to former child actor Corey Haim. We're seeing the Las Vegas shooting narrative, the official narrative, absolutely fall apart at the seams from really day 2. And now we see Hillary Clinton really taking more fire from Julian Assange at WikiLeaks, who's starting to make us believe there's even more DNC Hillary Clinton leaks coming. The whole power structure, at least in this country, JS, is falling apart, and it feels great because, as you know, Google is trying very hard to clamp down on the truth, which I think has affected you specifically. It's affected you as well, hasn't it?
Yeah, even in certain keywords which I really focused on as far as building my website, like best ways to invest in gold. And I used to be in the top 10 consistently year after year. And that's out of, I think, believe it was tens of millions of results. So that was super important to my business on Google. And then slowly got pushed down to the bottom of the page, and then to the next page, and then to the third page, and to the fourth page. And I noticed that I started getting pushed down more and more the more I spoke about the fraud of, the futures markets, of paper gold and paper silver markets, and how they didn't represent the actual supply and demand of the physical gold and physical silver markets. And also, the more I wrote about, if you're going to buy physical gold and physical silver, don't buy it in the banking system. You have to hold it outside the banking system because a banking system cannot be trusted. And so it's interesting because when I checked Baidu for the last 6-7 years, I'm still on the top 10 results. And the last time I checked, actually just last week, I was still actually the very first result for that exact same search, because I don't think China censors best ways to buy gold because they want their citizenry to own gold.
Yeah, it is very interesting because for people who don't know, in this country, Baidu is the Google in China. It is the biggest search engine in China. So apparently they haven't adopted the same censorship tactics that Google has, which is very funny because here we are sitting in the United States, and it's very clear at this point that Google is a fascist entity which is aligned with the deep state and against truth. So I'm starting to wonder where there's more internet freedom. Is it in China or is it with Google?
Yeah, I think actually it's probably pretty equal because I have spent some time in China. I know that the Chinese government censors a lot. So, for example, if I were criticizing the Chinese government, my search results would be buried. But, in this instance, it's interesting just to see how widely the search engine results vary just for, searches on gold.
Well, they don't want the truth about gold being told here either, but they're probably not quite as draconian about that. They're far more draconian about trying to keep 9/11 truth buried, trying to keep 7/7 truth buried about the London bombings, and absolutely now they've got the wagons circled about this Las Vegas official story, because if you type in Las Vegas shooting, all you're going to get is the mainstream media's official narrative of what happened. A lone gunman, no surveillance video backing it up. They're going to ignore all the eyewitness testimony. They're going to ignore all the police scanner recordings talking about multiple shooters, verified. All of it, according to the mainstream media and the official narrative, is nothing more than a mass delusion, and people aren't buying it.
Yeah, the very interesting thing I find about that shooting in Vegas is motive, right? Because usually you need some type of motive, and they still haven't been able to come up with a motive. Right? Is that correct? Because I haven't followed it super close, but
well, that's
yet to hear a motive.
No, that's 100% correct, although the early reports right out of the gate were that this, I think, 64-year-old man, Stephen Paddock, had been radicalized by ISIS, which is a very convenient catch-all, especially since this government, and I'm going to just say it out loud, you don't have to agree with it, Zionist entities in Israel, want to foster and foment ISIS terror around the globe so that the United States will continue to essentially do these proxy wars for another nation state and to continuously stay in a state of unconstitutional warfare around the globe, all in the back of fighting a boogeyman that used to be called Al-Qaeda, which is now called ISIS.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting how that is all developed, and it's all developing and playing out. But one last thing, if I may, Sean, the one last thing I wanted to say just about Bitcoin is, the interesting thing that I found out, I forgot to mention earlier, is I've asked people that invest in Bitcoin because they say it's the anti-banking, humanity liberating currency. If they would invest in a cryptocurrency, because, the whole, you're either for us or against this. Whenever I bring that up, people say, well, you're not for liberating humanity. And I say, I'm not necessarily against cryptocurrencies. I said I would definitely be for cryptocurrency that was backed by gold. And then people, talk to people that have invested and made a lot of money in Bitcoin, then say, oh, that's interesting. How would that work? And then I tell them, you wouldn't have the opportunity to make these massive 50,000% gains on a gold-backed cryptocurrency, because a properly constructed one would be measured by gold weight, and it would actually not even have any fiat currency price attached to it, because that's the real valuation of gold, is by weight, and shouldn't be valued in a fiat currency like dollars anyways. So I said, if we're aiming for sound money and price stability, and there are cryptocurrencies backed by gold, and people, will make the ridiculous argument there's not enough gold in the world to back it. Of course there is. It just depends on what fraction of gold would be the basis, the weight unit for a cryptocurrency, and you can make that divisible into very small fractions. So it could even be less than a gram. It could be a fraction of a gram, and it could certainly function in that way. There'd be more than enough gold in the world if you made it the units or fraction of a gram. And then guess what, Sean? I've yet to find one person that has bought Bitcoin because they say it liberates humanity. That said they would invest in a cryptocurrency backed by gold. Because once I tell them you're not going to have this opportunity to make like 10,000% or 20,000% gains because it's just going to be stable money, and it would be the most humanity-freeing, anti-banking, sound money in the world. They say they're not interested in a gold-backed cryptocurrency. So is that narrative really real, Sean? That's what I'm really getting at.
It's a great question, and you're right about fractionalized gold. I mean, they could divide all the fiat currencies in the world by however much above ground gold there is to get that correct number, and we've seen that with Bitcoin, which, wasn't that long ago. You could buy a Bitcoin for $600 or $700, and now only 1/5 of a Bitcoin is going to cost you more than $1,000. So it's really fractionalized Bitcoin as, fiat all over the globe pours into the cryptocurrency space. 2 questions before we let you go. Number one,
Sure.
have you done the math at all, since we're talking about gold? Have you done the math at all on what you think the real world value of an ounce of gold should be when priced in US dollars? Same question for silver.
Well, I think that's 2 separate questions you're asking me, Sean, because I think value and price are not the same concepts, although they get conflated a lot. Because if you look back to the times when gold and silver were money, and we just had gold and silver coins, right? They weren't priced in any type of currency, right? They're basically valued by weight. So I still think today the true value is by weight. So if we ever were to go back, like I said, to a gold-backed cryptocurrency, I think they should be valued by weight only, because when we value them in by price, which I think is a wrong way to do it, then that's how we give the people in control, the central bankers, the ability to move price up and down, and therefore, in their minds, since people equate price with value, control the narrative in that sense. So by value, I think it's always, the same, because 1 gram of gold is 1 gram of gold anywhere in the world, and 1 gram of silver is 1 gram of silver anywhere in the world. And the interesting thing is, even in physical form today in coins, they don't have the same equivalent fiat currency price. So in other words, like a 1 ounce silver coin, I believe, is it says $1, right? That's what's minted on it. Of course, you're going to have to spend, more than north of $20 to buy 1 ounce of silver.
Right.
For a silver coin. But in Canada, we'll say 5 Canadian dollars.
Right.
But if you do the Forex, right, doesn't come out to the same equivalent US dollar. And then it's the same thing in China when you look at what they actually will stamp on, their same, 1 ounce silver coin or 1 ounce gold coin in yuan, and then convert it over to US dollars. They're all different fiat currency prices, which is ridiculous. But if we're just saying what would be the free market price if the central bankers didn't control it, actually, I have no idea. I just know it would be multiples of what it is today. And I know that some people have tried to calculate it by looking at the highs in the 1980s and then looking at the real inflation rate, not the official government inflation rate, which is not really official. But if they look at the real official rate, then I've seen people come up with those like $1,000 silver prices and north of $10,000 for gold. So I think that's how they have come up with those prices. They just basically equate to the highest fiat currency US dollar price in the 1980s and then account for what real inflation has been and then just give the inflation adjusted price.
Right. Well, Adrian Douglas did so much work with the M1, M2, M3 money supply too, and trying to figure out how much money's actually been printed that we know about, not even counting the money we don't know about, and the trillions that have exchanged hands, between banks and, who really knows how much money they've printed? Because, when you own the printing presses, JS, and when you control the notes coming from the Federal Reserve, and the central banks are all owned by one central authority, leading right back to the Bank for International Settlements above the IMF and the World Bank, who truly knows what the truth is? The only people who know the truth are those people that Bill Hicks talked about when the president gets taken down to the elevator in the basement of the White House on the first day, and he meets a whole bunch of oligarchs smoking cigars in a dark room, and he asks them, okay, what's my agenda? And they lower a big screen real slowly, and they show an all-new angle of President Kennedy being shot that no one's ever seen before. And then they look at him and they say, any questions? And he says, nope, only what my agenda is.
Yeah, that's why I think it's a futile exercise. And I know I think even as recently as last week, I saw another prediction of silver going to $500 just but everything is based upon estimate upon estimate upon estimate. Because like you said, there's only a small handful of people that know the truth about anything. Even when we look at China's gold reserves, right? There have been estimates they have 20,000 tons, including, all the reserves held by the citizenry of China as well as the PBOC. But no, again, it's just based upon a lot of speculation, and you can kind of, do some backtracking, try to look at like imports of gold from Hong Kong to China to try to come up with estimates that people think are pretty accurate. But we're still dealing with estimates, and there's probably pretty wide variance, in those estimates for a certain percent of error, correct? So, in the end, I think we're all just speculating and really trying to come up with, a best guess.
No, I completely agree with you, and it's what we're up against, and it's why you and I have really dedicated our lives to trying very hard to find truth and speak truth to whoever we can, wherever we find it, and, to hell with the consequences, because if we don't stand up for truth, for the Constitution, at least in this country, for human rights around the world, and against the deep state and the shadow governments that control the world, we all know what's coming. We all know what's coming. Transhumanism, 5G, the Internet of Everything controlled by very few, all of the assets being centralized for the benefit of the very few at the detriment of the very many. J.S. Kim stands with me for truth. And J.S., how can we support you? I know that your new venture, Smart Knowledge Wealth Academy, is something you're very excited about. So tell us about that and how we can support your efforts.
Well, you can follow me on social media at SK, standing for Smart Knowledge, SK Wealth Academy, on Snapchat and Twitter, because I'll be releasing a lot more information about the launch of SK Wealth Academy, which I think will be in early 2018. And basically what SK Wealth Academy or Smart Knowledge Wealth Academy is, I'm really excited about this, Sean, because it's going to be an online education academy and like the name wealth, but it's going to focus on a more holistic definition of wealth, because I think today people define wealth and success just by material wealth. But I look at wealth as not including material wealth, because that's important, because if you don't have the money to pay your bills, that's a lot of stress in your life. So I'm not saying material wealth is not important at all, but I think it's just a small part of the overall equation, which also includes psychological wealth and happiness, which also includes finding your mission in life, which also includes critical thought, which I see less and less of today, because I think those that are in charge of the power structure today have been very successful in dividing us. It's the whole divide and conquer, because we're forced to take sides: liberal versus conservatives, Democrats versus Republicans, left versus right. And we've discussed the division in the Bitcoin, the anti-banking versus banking, or liberating humanity versus further enslaving humanity. And I think that a lot of people, we have these beliefs that we believe are our own, but we haven't really even critically thought about it. I think a lot of the beliefs, if we're truly honest with ourselves, are beliefs we've embraced, that we've been told to embrace, and not really beliefs that we formed on our own. So one of the very important focus of Smart Knowledge Wealth Academy is I want to basically develop something that I think has been lost in academics, because I don't equate academics today with education, because I think if you can't critically think, then you're not educated. And as an Ivy League graduate, university graduate, I know that my critical thinking skills are not fostered, that basically I had to foster my own critical thinking skills outside of the academic system. So I want to return education to academics, as odd as that sounds, because I think education for a large portion of what constitutes education has been stripped out of academia.
I completely agree, and critical thinking skills is exactly what I jotted down while you were talking, because I'm glad you got there. I think it is the most important asset we can give our young people, is the ability to critically think and ask questions and challenge authority. And in today's authoritative system, as you know, JS, they don't want to be challenged by critical thinkers. At least in this country, we have a whole system that has been deliberately dumbed down to prevent critical thinking. Sounds like SK Wealth Academy is going to be well worth the investment. Guys, I want you to check that out. And JS, remind us how we can follow you on Twitter so we can get the latest updates.
Sure. Twitter, my handle is SK Wealth Academy. I'll Snapchat, it's the same SK Wealth Academy. So those are probably the two best avenues to follow me. And then actually on YouTube, it's Smart Knowledge U. So I'm going to do a podcast of the article in which I question whether Bitcoin is a Trojan horse. So for those that, just like to listen to podcasts, I'm going to put an audio podcast feed. So if you just follow me on YouTube at Smart Knowledge U, you'll be able to find that in a couple weeks up as well.
Okay, very good. Guys, I want to thank each and every one of you for tuning in. It means the world to us. You guys are very special people. You are the people with critical thinking. You are the people who are engaged. You are the people who are able to and willing to make change and speak up. Speak truth to your friends, family, colleagues, neighbors, because I know most of them don't want to hear it, but little by little we will win this battle with false flag events like the Las Vegas shooting helping us to wake people up, whether the deep state and the shadow government wants it or not. And my thanks to J.S. Kim for joining us tonight live from Bangkok, Singapore. J.S., thank you.
You're welcome, Sean.
Really do appreciate it. Guys, I appreciate each and every one of you. A special thanks to my patrons over at patreon.com. You made a huge difference for us, keeping us in the fight. Thank you so much. Thank you guys so much for listening. God bless.
There is no conspiracy between the FBI, between LVMPD, and the MGM. Nobody is attempting to hide anything.